I'm going to give you a tour of a house I lived in Lawrence, Kansas. Not a tour of the house, but of the neighborhood. And tell you a story about how I became a journalist. And it kind of fills me with dread to tell this story, to approach this house on Westwood Road, which is a circle. My family and I moved up to this fancy neighborhood from our more working class neighborhood when I was in 4th grade, and my father was promoted to run the special collections at the University of Kansas Library. It was a big success, except that he was an alcoholic and his drinking got worse, and it was the 1970 and the world was falling apart, and we lost my father to alcohol and craziness, and we stayed in this big house, but we never quite fit into the neighborhood. I was a hippie kid, drug user. It was just, it's kind of hard. And this is the house that we lived in. It was made of brick and cement with asbestos roof tiles, and my older brother and I lived in the basement. We had windows onto the backyard, but we were half underground. And it was always damp down there, and there was often violence in the house, and for those couple of years when my father was still there, and it was rough. But my mother became best friends with the mayor's wife, who lived down in this next house, and I became friends with her son. Her son ended up walking through the plate glass windows on the side of this house and dying, bleeding to death on the lawn during a drug-induced frenzy. That was a few years later than the story I'm about to tell you. But every night my mother would come over here and drink. She was a drinker too. And we would come down and hang out, me and my two brothers, and often have dinner here, and very interesting conversations, very lively people. Just not really like your classic parenting manual type people. And the neighborhood was very, I would say, uptight, with dentists and people like that who didn't appreciate me. I never felt. They once called the police on me and my friends because we were sitting in the lawn up here, the shared circle. So one time when I was in about 7th grade, I was 12 years old, Bill Moyers, a famous journalist, came to town. He was traveling across America, much as I am, 13,000-mile trip to understand what America is thinking. And he came to Lawrence and stayed with the Raineys. During his stay here, there were riots. We were having civil rights riots, what they called race riots at the high school, anti-Vietnam War riots. It was quite violent. There were people burning things. And the mayor's daughter's black boyfriend, she was white, he was black. He got shot by police in an alley, and that triggered a week of incredible frustration and violence I think it united the anti-Vietnam War people with the civil rights people. And Bill Moyers was here, and I would listen to him talk down there. He stayed for several days with I think he had a crew of a few people. And I'd always known I wanted to be a writer, but he was the first journalist I met. And I guess he took a liking to me because one night there was a curfew, I think an 8 o'clock curfew. And because the mayor was the mayor, he could go past the curfew line. So he and Bill Moyers and I took a drive down this road, which was dark and frightening. There were National Guard in different spots. There were police. There were protesters. It felt eerie and like nothing I'd ever seen. It felt like television, but it felt more real than television. It hit me to my bones. I actually loved it. I was riding in the back seat with this guy, Bill Moyers, up front, the mayor driving. And we just drove down the street. Past houses of prosperity, when I look at them now, it's unbelievable to me how prosperous this neighborhood is. We didn't feel prosperous whatsoever at my house. So Crescent Road, aptly named because it curves like a crescent roll, as we call croissants here in Kansas. We are on Mount Orient, and it looks like I have to take a detour, which did not exist when I was here last. So I will go down here, and it's interesting, this shows you how high up Mount Orient is in Lawrence, Kansas. And legend has it that this Mount Orient was blessed by an Indian shaman at some point, and the result was that a tornado has never hit this mountain, as we call it. I hope the cops don't get me for doing this. And if they do, I just have to explain it's for a good cause. It's to make my viewing audience happy. Back behind us is the auditorium where I saw Abby Hoffman speak at about the same time, 1970. I snuck out. My mother forbade me from going. But I snuck out and walked down the hill and snuck in. I was wearing an American flag t-shirt and listened to Abby Hoffman spout his stuff, which I think I would find inane at this moment, but was very powerful at that moment. So we drove down this road and entered the University of Kansas campus. The town at that time was about 20 or 30,000 people, and the campus held about 15 or 20,000 students. So the students really had a great influence on the culture of the town. And I spent a lot of time on this college campus. A lot of time causing trouble, smoking pot, breaking into buildings, setting off fire extinguishers. You know, we were vandalous youth. It was a vandalous time. The 1970 was a tumultuous year. The country seemed to be falling apart. Very similar to this year. I would completely forgive any child who got into trouble this year in our country, because I know what it was like in 1970. As a child, you wonder what is happening, and you think that maybe you can have some influence over it. We came down here and there was actually smoke. I remember smoke blowing over the road. And this is where the concentration of National Guardsmen were. At that time, I'm sure they were all men. But they stopped us and checked us. They had a roadblock here, and they checked the mayor for his ID and looked at me in the back seat with a little puzzlement. Right now, we're driving past the library where my father's career took off for a couple of very short years, and he did some really interesting things, but then he got fired. His alcoholism took him down. We would stop here often with my mother when I was very young. We would stop here and wait for my father to leave those doors and come down, and he was always wearing a tweed suit or sometimes a black pinstripe suit. Oxford shoes, well shined, crew cut, always looked very nice. And this building here is where my mother studied psychology and became an MSW in order to support us after my father, left the scene. So here there was tons of people protesting. There were tons of National Guard. There was smoke, a lot of smoke, and it wasn't from tear gas, it was from smoke, from burning trash, burning buildings. This is the beautiful little art museum that I used to go to. It had a big influence on me, and across is the Natural History Museum, which you can't see, that holds a horse that supposedly was at the Custer's last stand. So we came down here and Bill Moyers was just jotting in his notebook furiously and asking the mayor questions and just taking in everything. And the fact of this mysterious access that we had to this incredible situation that was unfolding in this my little town in Kansas, I think that's part of what made me want to be a journalist, was just the chance to go behind the scenes and to go where you weren't supposed to go, which was something I've always loved to do, and to have the freedom to report and register what you thought. The biggest thing was that this building here, the Student Union, this massive building, had a huge fire that night. That's a Jayhawk. That's a symbol of the University of Kansas. And I have no idea why a Jayhawk, but it's a pretty cute one. They're called the Kansas Jayhawks. Something to do with history. I don't know. I should know. I studied Kansas history in 4th grade. State bird, meadowlark, state flower, sunflower. Look at all these Jayhawks. Damn. So anyway, I used that Bill Moyers story. I remember when I applied to Stanford University in journalism in the 80s, and I didn't have very good grades and from my college, but I wrote this kick-ass essay about how Bill Moyers inspired me to be a journalist, and I think that really helped me get into grad school in journalism, which really changed the course of my life. And here I am sharing it with you, and I hope it's been semi-interesting to you. That's the tour of the University of Kansas and my little house on Westwood Road, and something about my life and how I came to be in this car driving around the country, just like Bill Moyers.